Hello everyone, good evening. I hope everyone is hale, hearty and safe during this lockdown period. The topic for today's discussion is arbitration, practice and procedure. We will primarily be focusing, as far as today's discussion is concerned, on what exactly is arbitration in the Indian context, what are the practices and procedure pertaining to arbitration, specifically for a domestic arbitration. Now, arbitration can be defined as a flexible and consensual process in which people can choose who their judge would be, and among that judge, people participate in the adjudicatory process to get their disputes resolved. In India, the arbitration law is primarily governed by Arbitration Act 1996. The Arbitration Act 1996 has undergone two major amendments, one in 2015 and the recent one in 2019. During the course of today's discussion, we will be covering both those amendments, they being the major amendments to the Arbitration Act. Now, as we all know that India is a signatory to the New York and the Geneva Convention, and the primary benefit of being a signatory to the New York and Geneva Convention is that arbitral awards passed in India as well as arbitral awards passed in any of the signatories to these conventions can be directly enforced in one jurisdiction or the other, and that is one of the major reasons, as far as foreign arbitrations are concerned, why people choose to go for arbitrations. As we all know, under section 44 of CPC, there are very limited number of jurisdictions in which the decrees passed by Indian courts or decrees of foreign courts can be enforced in India. However, as most of the countries throughout the globe are signatories to the Geneva and the New York Convention, the arbitral awards passed in various jurisdictions can immediately be enforced under the reciprocating treaties. Now, today's discussion is primarily going to be concerning about what are the basic practices and procedures pertaining to arbitrations in India. The first issue when anyone is faced in respect of arbitration is concerned is that which court will have the jurisdiction. And the definition of a court which will have jurisdiction over a particular arbitration matter is given in section 2E of the Arbitration Act 1996, and which basically is the primary court of civil jurisdiction, principal court of civil jurisdiction. Now, as far as Delhi is concerned, as we all know that Delhi has a pecuniary jurisdiction, and if it is read in consonance with the Commercial Courts Act, then we have to first of all see where exactly to go for arbitration and which court will have jurisdiction over a particular arbitral dispute. As far as determination of jurisdiction is concerned, the issue which is faced by Delhi lawyers maximum is that whether the district courts will have jurisdiction or whether the High Court will have jurisdiction whenever they have to file a Section 34 petition or they have to file for a Section 9 petition, which is Section 9 generally would be, in most of the cases, would be the starting point of a lot of arbitrations. In these circumstances, the jurisdiction is to be decided by, now this law is pretty clear, is to be decided by adding the claim and the counterclaim values. So if the claim value is over 2 crores, we automatically will end up going to the High Court, and if the claim value is less than 2 crores, then the jurisdiction would be vested before the district court. Now, Arbitration Act is divided into several parts and several schedules. Part 1 primarily pertains to arbitrations in India, and we will be concentrating more about the domestic arbitrations for today's session. Part 1A, which has been recently added into the Arbitration Act by 2019 amendment, is pertaining to the Arbitration Council of India. This particular part has not yet been notified. Then part 2 is enforcement of certain foreign awards, and part 3 is conciliation, Part 4 is supplementary provisions, and there are in total now 8 schedules to the Arbitration Act. So if we start by the Arbitration Act, what constitutes as an arbitration agreement? Arbitration agreement, the primary requirement is that it has to be in writing, and Section 7 of the Arbitration Act provides that in what all circumstances an arbitration agreement will be enforceable. The first primary condition is that it has to be an agreement in writing. There are other possibilities of also that an arbitration agreement which has been through an exchange of letters, telex, telegrams, etc. is also enforceable. And similarly, an exchange of statements of claim and defense in which the existence of an arbitration agreement is alleged by one party and not denied by the other is also enforceable as per Section 7. Then comes Section 8 of the Arbitration Act. Section 8 of the Arbitration Act is one of the most crucial provisions of Arbitration Act and has seen a lot of important amendments pursuant to the 2015 amendment. If any party ends up filing a suit pertaining to an agreement in which there is an arbitration clause, the opposite party can move an application under Section 8 of the Arbitration Act and request the court, the civil court in which the suit has been filed, to refer the parties to arbitration. Now, in this, the recent amendment pertaining to the Arbitration Act in 2015 are slightly crucial and are to be dealt with. As before the amendment, party was required to produce the original or the duly certified copy of the arbitration agreement to the court for referring the dispute to arbitral tribunal. There used to be situations frequently that one party used to be willing to refer the party for arbitration, but the original or duly certified copy was retained with another party. That is why the court used to refuse the application on the ground of not producing original or duly certified copy. The amended Section 8 now of the Act provides that the power of the judicial authority to refer the parties to arbitration, notwithstanding any judgment or decree or order of the Supreme Court or any court, unless it finds that prima facie no valid arbitration agreement exists. So, pursuant to the amendment, all that a judicial authority is supposed to see, all that a court is supposed to see, is that whether there is existence of an arbitration agreement or not. Once the court is satisfied that the arbitration agreement exists between the parties, then all other disputes, including disputes pertaining to limitation, disputes pertaining to merits, dispute pertaining to everything, is to be left to the arbitrators to be decided under Section 16. The court will not go into all of those queries at the stage of referring the parties to arbitration. Now, furthermore, the amendment also provides that the original arbitration agreement or a certified copy thereof, when it is not available with one of the parties, then also the parties can be referred. If the said agreement or certified copy is retained by the other party, then the party so applying shall file such application along with a copy of the arbitration agreement and a petition praying to the court to call upon the other party to produce the original arbitration agreement or its duly certified copy before the court. Thus, most prevalent misuse of the earlier provision has been done away with the amendment. Section 8 to a very large extent is pretty much similar in its scope to Section 11 of the arbitration agreement. Now, Section 11 is a situation where party approached the court for appointment of an arbitrator. Now, Section 11 is a standalone provision and the normal scope of Section 2E in respect of court does not apply to Section 11. In as much as Section 11 is under the Chief Justice scheme for appointment of the arbitrators, and a High Court in case of a domestic arbitration and Supreme Court in case of international arbitration would only have the jurisdiction to appoint an arbitrator. In this Section 11 also, there have been sweeping changes which have been made, and most importantly, the words which have been added in Section 11.4 and 11.6 is that notwithstanding any judgment to the contrary previously. So now when anyone files a Section 11 petition, the court is not bound to look at all decisions which have been entered into previously in respect of appointment of the arbitrators and the court is to only and only limited extent of the court is to see whether the arbitration agreement exists and whether there is an arbitrable dispute between the parties. The law has seen significant changes in respect of Section 11. In the earlier cases of Konkan Railways, it was looked at by the Supreme Court that the power under Section 11 is primarily a power which is akin to an administrative power vested with the High Court or the Supreme Court. The court did not at that stage, the court was not supposed to look into all of these issues pertaining to life claim, limitation, merits of the case, and was supposed to refer the parties to arbitration. Then came the judgment of SBP versus Patel Engineering in 2005, 8 SCC 618, in which the law by a 9-member bench of the Supreme Court saw a major change, and the Supreme Court held that from being an administrative power, it is actually a judicial power, and the court has to look at a lot of other things as well in respect of whether the claim is a live claim, whether the claim will be a stale claim as far as Limitation Act is concerned, whether there has been any kind of coercion, whether there is any kind of fraud. All of those things were gone into at Section 11 stage itself by the court. So that became a very cumbersome process. That cumbersome process has been done away to a very large extent by the recent amendment of 2015 by adding the words notwithstanding any judgment to the contrary. Pursuant to this amendment, the Supreme Court in the case of Duro Felgura again went back to the Konkan the court will refer the parties to arbitration, and all of the other issues to be decided will be left to the arbitrator to be decided under Section 16. Also, what is relevant over here is that there has been a new recent line of cases in which non-signatories to arbitration agreement have also been referred to arbitration, starting from Chloro Controls onwards to Amit Lalchand Shah. The concept of group company doctrine, where parties by their intrinsic intention have shown an intention to be bound by the arbitration and are a related party or related to a group company, have also been referred to arbitration. As far as the fees of the arbitrator is concerned, that is now covered under Section 11A to be covered by under the 4th schedule. But unfortunately, the 4th schedule also specifically provides that it is something which is not mandatory right now, and it is something which will only be directory, and the state government will have to formulate policies and rules and regulations in respect of making those applicables to each specific state.
Here's what I found.
In respect of the Schedule 4 not being directory and only being mandatory, the judgments which are relevant is Paschimlal Vidyut Vitran and GS Developers versus Alpha. The Supreme Court also in the decision of Duro Felgura has held that where even though a single project is being undertaken by pursuant to a particular agreement, but there are several agreements which have been entered into. So let's say, for example, if someone contracts someone contracts for construction of a house, there are contracts which are given for supply of bricks, there are contracts which are given for erection of those bricks, and there are contracts which are given for electrification. So there may be a host of contracts in respect of a single project. All of these separate projects will be considered as separate arbitration. So as far as them being considered as separate arbitration, it has a huge implication not just on the number of arbitrations, but also on the fees that will be charged by the arbitrators. Because as far as quantification of fees is concerned, most of the arbitrators end up charging separate fees for separate arbitrations. So if there are 3 or 4 arbitrations which are referred to pursuant to one single project, pursuant to 3 or 4 agreements in respect of that project, all of those agreements will necessarily have separate fees. So that is one thing what we all have to keep in mind when we are getting our arbitrations referred from the court, or we are referring ourselves to decide in respect of how the arbitrations will be conducted, because that will have a huge implication in respect of the fees to be paid to the arbitrator. There was quite a lot of debate in respect of what exactly, as far as the 4th schedule is concerned, because if you look at the 4th schedule is a pro rata ad valorem kind of a fee schedule which has been prescribed. So in arbitrations which are governed by 4th schedule, the issue which arose for consideration a lot of times was that whether the sum in dispute, because the term which has been used in the 4th schedule is that the sum in dispute is to be looked at for purposes of calculation of fees. The issue which arose before the courts was that whether the sum in dispute would include claim as well as the counterclaim or not. In that eventuality, the Delhi High Court in its recent decision in DSIDC versus Bhavana Infra has held that the sum in dispute is the sum total of claim and counterclaims. So a lot of debate in respect of the calculation of sum in dispute has been put to rest with this decision, and I hope not further litigation would ensue from there, but all lawyers are pretty creative as far as creating arguments are concerned, so we really don't know. Section 11 further provides, Section 11 subsection 7 specifically provides that there is no appeal which has been prescribed under the Act in respect of the appointment or refusal to appoint an arbitrator is concerned. So the only remedy available by a party which is aggrieved pursuant to the decision of the High Court is only to prefer a special leave petition before the Supreme Court, and there is no letters patent appeal which shall lie against such a decision. Now under Section 12, the arbitrator has to disclose in writing the existence of any relationship or interest of any kind which is likely to give rise to justifiable grounds as to his neutrality. And he is also supposed to disclose any circumstances which are likely to affect his ability to devote sufficient time to arbitration and complete the arbitration within the specified period. That disclosure is required by the arbitrator to be given at the first available opportunity, which is immediately after his appointment, once he receives the letter of reference. In all arbitrations, wherever you are participating, you can always ask the arbitrator to make a disclosure under Section 12 at the very first instance, whenever you get an opportunity, in case the arbitrator has not done so. In this context, Schedule 5 and Schedule 7 are also which are very relevant. Schedule 5 is been added into the added by the amendment of 2015, and Schedule 7, they pretty much look like they are very overlapping provisions, but on a closer scrutiny there is quite a lot of more important judgments in respect of Section 12 are pertaining to the disclosure and required from the arbitrator is Voice Alpine, in which the Supreme Court decided that under Schedule 5 and Schedule 7 there is a distinction. Under Schedule 5, if there is an issue and any person who has been appointed as an arbitrator falls in any of the categories which have been mentioned in Schedule 7, the party aggrieved can immediately approach the court and ask for his removal. But however, Schedule 5, there is a distinction. Schedule 5, it is only reasonable apprehension which has been provided, because if you look at the wordings of Schedule 5 and Schedule 7, they are slightly different. So what we really have to look at is if you fall in Schedule 7, if any arbitrator falls in any of the categories in Schedule 7, you can immediately approach the court. But if they fall in Schedule 5, then you have to wait for the arbitral tribunal to render a decision and then go under Section 34. The TRF judgment of the Supreme Court laid also further emphasis that any managing director or his nominee cannot appoint a sole arbitrator in the matter. The TRF judgment was further developed by the Supreme Court in the judgment of Perkins, where it was held that no sole arbitrator can be appointed by any party who is interested in the outcome of the dispute. So now there is a situation when the sole arbitrators are falling in a separate category than a 3-member tribunal, and as far as sole arbitrators are concerned, the sole arbitrator cannot be appointed by any party who is interested in outcome of a dispute. After Section 11 is Section 12, 13 and 14 and 15 which fall in a single composite category. So if there is any issue pertaining to the arbitrators and if pertaining to arbitrator being biased, parties can raise those issues under section the procedure which has been prescribed under 12 to 15 under the Arbitration Act. Under Section 12, the party can directly approach the arbitrator for any kind of an issue if the bias is found, and if there is any particular issue pertaining to his failure or impossibility to act under Section 14, then the party can straight away approach the High Court for terminating his mandate. Now, there has been a lot of debate whether Section 14 per se is maintainable without first preferring a issue before the arbitrator himself under Section 13 and 14, under Section 12 and 13. In respect of this, if the arbitrator falls in any of the categories under Schedule 7, then the party is free to approach now, after the recent judgments, free to approach directly to the court. But if he is not falling in any of the categories stipulated under Schedule 7, then the only remedy which is available to you is to first file an application before the arbitral tribunal, and once that application has been decided, then under Section 34, once the award is rendered, then go and challenge that on the ground of bias at the stage of Section 34. Then I'll deal with interim measures. Interim measures are provided under Section 9 and Section 17. Now, Section 9 and Section 17 are interim measures by court and interim measures by the arbitral tribunal. Prior to 2015 amendment, Section 9, the court had much more sweeping powers than what were prescribed and provided under Section 17 to the arbitral tribunal as far as interim measures of protection are concerned. Now, by virtue of the amendment in 2015, the power under Section 9 and under Section 17 have been almost made equal, and the court and the tribunal have pretty much the same power as far as Section 9 and Section 17 are concerned. Pursuant to the recent amendment, the arbitration has to be commenced within a period of 90 days from the date of any order which is passed as an interim measure of protection by the court, or within such further time as the court may determine. The main issue which arises is that when a party can approach under Section 9 to the court and when the party has to approach the arbitral tribunal under Section 17. The law in respect of this is that prior to the award, any party can file under Section 9, provided the arbitral tribunal has not yet been constituted. Where the arbitral tribunal has been constituted, the power under Section 9 is no more available with the court after the 2015 amendment. However, after the award has been pronounced, only successful party is permitted to approach the arbitral tribunal, to approach the court under Section 9, and the losing party is not permitted to approach the court under Section 9. The Bombay High Court in Dirk India versus Maharashtra State Electricity Generation Company and Windward versus Enercon has taken the consistent view that once the party has lost the arbitration, as court does not sit in appeal under Section 34, therefore the power is not available to be exercised in such cases. Furthermore, Section 9 has implication because under Section 42, wherever party first files, that court will automatically have jurisdiction. So, Section 42 in this context, if you look at, provides that notwithstanding anything contained elsewhere in this part or in any other law for the time being in force, where with respect to an arbitration agreement, any application under this part has been made in a court, that court alone shall have jurisdiction. So if you end up filing a Section 9 petition before a particular court, the issue of jurisdiction to a very large extent lays to rest, because that court only will have jurisdiction pursuant to Section 42. The other issue which also arises in petitions under Section 9 as well as Section 17 is that whether under the provisions of Order 38 Rule 5 are applicable or not. There is a lot of debate and a lot of conflicting judgments as far as this issue is concerned. As we all know, Order 38 Rule 5 provides that interim measure of protection in form of attachment of a particular property of the contesting party can be attached even prior to a decree being passed or a judgment being delivered in cases where the person is trying to evade the decree and is taking away his assets from the jurisdiction of the court in question. Now, a lot of times this is not necessarily possible, and this is something which is a lot of parties don't plead this. The Bombay High Court at least has taken a view that Order 38 Rule 5 in its complete rigor is not applicable, even though principles governing Order 38 Rule 5 may be a guiding principle, but Bombay High Court, at least in 3 or 4 judgments in Delta Construction, National Shipping and Adhunik, has taken a consistent view that they are not applicable. However, there is a conflicting line of judgment in ITI versus Siemens, the Supreme Court, and in VK Sood versus Northern Railways, Supreme Court again took a view that Order 38 Rule 5 is applicable. This has a huge implication, because if Order 38 Rule 5 is made applicable to all provisions under Section 9 and Section 17, the scope of exercising discretion available with the court and the arbitral tribunal decreases substantially. Once any party can defeat any interim application on the ground that provisions of Order 38 Rule 5 have not been complied with. Order 38 Rule 5 is a very cumbersome provision and a cumbersome requirement in the sense that you have to specifically show that a particular party is trying to defeat any possible decree which will be passed by the arbitral tribunal and is trying to dissipate all his assets and taking it out of the jurisdiction. So when filing a Section 17 or a Section 9 petition, we have to be very careful in how we draft it and whether these specific necessary ingredients have been taken into consideration. In Chapter 5, pertaining to the conduct of arbitral proceedings before the arbitrator, the first guiding principle always is that the parties should be treated equally, and Section 19 is where most of the issues arise as far as the conduct of the arbitral proceedings are concerned. Section 19(1) specifically provides the arbitral tribunal shall not be bound by the Code of Civil Procedure or the Indian Evidence Act. So the terms which have been used over there are shall not be bound by. But the words which have been used do not specifically say that they shall not be applicable to arbitral proceedings. So this has also created to a lot of debate that whether the code of civil procedure, whether it is per se applicable or whether the principles which are applicable. To my mind, I think the principles governing CPC and Evidence Act are certainly applicable to arbitration proceedings, at least which are being conducted in India, because the substantive law is of India and the curial law goes with the substantive law. But however, as far as most of the arbitrations are concerned, there is a bit of flexibility and the specific provisions are not applicable in their complete rigor and their strictness as are applicable to civil proceedings before a civil court. Section 21 is providing the commencement of arbitral proceedings, and that is generally what is used as a stop time for the limitations to start running. Section 21, as soon as you receive a notice under Section 21, the limitation is reckoned from that date, and there are clear judgments to the effect that in case where you have received a notice invoking arbitration and you have in the notice invoking arbitration you have not given a counter notice under Section 21 for your counter claims, then your limitation is still at large. So the best practice is that wherever you receive a notice on behalf of any particular client of yours, you receive any notice, then immediately thereafter, if you have any counterclaim, if that client has any counterclaims, you should immediately serve a counter notice under Section 21 and give a notice under Section 21 for your counterclaims as well. Then Section 27 is slightly, which is more relevant, and that is court's assistance in taking evidence. Now, Section 27 in the judgment of BHEL versus Sailor has been interpreted by the Delhi High Court that it is not applicable to parties before the arbitration proceedings. As far as arbitration proceedings are concerned and the parties which are participating in those arbitration proceedings, if any party wants production of document, that power, it has been held, is vested with the arbitral tribunal, and the arbitral tribunal does not have to refer the matter to the court in taking their assistance of the court to get that document out of a participating party to the arbitration agreement per se. It has been held that this is a provision which is only limited to third parties, where a third party you have to collect some evidence from, and who's not forthcoming with that evidence, you can certainly apply to you can apply to the arbitral tribunal, who can give you permission, and subsequent to that the court can be approached for taking evidence. Section 27(5) is also, which is a recent amendment which is to be read along with Section 17 now. This is providing that the arbitral tribunal has similar powers of executing its orders as a court. So if arbitral tribunal has passed any order under Section 17 and the party has not complied that, then you can immediately move the court under the Contempt of Courts Act without taking any permission or referral from the arbitral tribunal and prosecute the non-compliant party with contempt of courts. That brings us to Section 34, which is the challenge to an arbitral award. Or before that, I think Section 29A. Let me deal with Section 29A first. Section 29A has been added pursuant to the 2015 amendment, which basically provides that any arbitration proceeding now has to be completed within a period of 12 months, and parties by mutual agreement can extend this period by another period of 6 months. If the arbitration is not concluded within a period of 18 months, then the only option available to the parties is to go and approach the court for seeking an extension of time in respect of pronouncement of award under that arbitration. The 2019 amendment also has provided that parties get 6 months to complete the pleadings. And the issue which arose was that whether this completion of pleading 6 months time is to be added in that 1 year plus 6 months, making the total time for declaring the arbitral award as 2 years. To my mind, the 2 year period which has been prescribed is something which is necessary for arbitration, because arbitrations generally get very complex in whenever there are construction disputes, and so that flexibility is to be provided to the arbitrators. And one, it is practically impossible to, most of the arbitrations I would say is practically impossible to complete within a period of 1 year. The review which is available with the court under section 29A is extremely limited. Most of the times what was happening was that any party which had an allegation or which was not satisfied by the conduct of a particular arbitrator would file an application of bias, when the other party would have filed an application for extension of time and would have requested for a change of tribunal. The High Court in the case of NCC versus Union of India has held that bias allegation is not something which will be considered at the stage of 29A. That is something for which there are specific provisions under the Arbitration Act, and those have to be complied with in case that plea has to be raised. The same view has been taken in a lot of other judgments also now. So the review of the court in respect of entertaining any petition under section 29A is limited to only and only whether delay has happened and what is the cause of that delay. So there is a very limited review what the court undertakes. More or less, most of the times the time is enlarged for pronouncing the award if the court is satisfied that there are sufficient grounds and there is not a particular reason, or the arbitrator himself is not to be blamed for any delays which are caused to the arbitration proceeding. Now under section 34, any award which has been passed by the arbitrator can be challenged. As far as the challenge to an arbitration award is concerned, the judgment in Bharat Aluminium versus Kaiser has held that for purposes of part 1 to apply, the seat of arbitration is something what is extremely relevant. So if the seat is within India, the Indian courts would have jurisdiction and section 34 would automatically be applicable. However, in case the seat of arbitration is outside India, then the party cannot challenge the award in India under provisions of section 34. In the judgment of Bharat Aluminium, the court has also overruled the earlier decisions of Bhatia International and Venture Global, which were all giving different interpretations to the applicability of section 34. And over here, a distinction is to be drawn between venue and seat. Venue does not necessarily confer jurisdiction, but seat confers jurisdiction on a particular court within whose jurisdiction the seat of the arbitration is. So if the seat is in Delhi, the Delhi courts will have jurisdiction. If the seat is in Delhi but the venue is in Gurgaon, still the jurisdiction would be vested with the Delhi courts only. So venue is something which is a matter of convenience. Arbitral tribunal can very well say that okay, for convenience we are meeting during these times when corona is going on, when lockdown is going on. A lot of arbitration proceedings are happening over video conference when all the parties are sitting at different places. Despite that, the seat of the arbitration would always remain constant. Venue may keep on changing. Now, before amendment of the Arbitration Act, the main ground of challenge of an arbitral award under section 34 was that it has to be contrary to public policy. Now, the meaning of public policy was not clear, and the explanation of the section only provided that it would be considered as opposed to public policy of India if the making of the award was induced or affected by fraud or corruption or was in violation of section 75 or 81. In the lack of elaborate provision, there was a major scope of judicial intervention, and in Renu Sagar Power versus General Electricity Corporation, the Apex Court determined the term public policy as anything contrary to number 1, fundamental policy of India, number 2, the interest of India, and number 3, justice or morality. This interpretation was widened by the Supreme Court in ONGC versus SAW Pipes 2003-5 SCC 705, wherein the Apex Court added one more ground to the meaning of public policy, it held that the award can be set aside if it is patently illegal. And patently illegal means the illegality must go to the root of the matter. Now, and there is a huge number of judgments in respect of this. Now, when we compile all of this judgment, it becomes slightly confusing for everyone that what is something what the court can look at section 34 stage and what is something what the court will not look at section 34 stage. So let me just put it this way, that if the arbitral award is plainly contrary to the plain reading of the contract itself, then that is something what the court will set aside under section 34. But where there are two possible interpretations to a particular clause and the award is based on one possible interpretation of the contract, then that is something what is outside the realm of the court under section 34. The second principle which emerges is that reappreciation of evidence is not permissible under section 34. But if any vital evidence has been completely ignored by the arbitral tribunal while giving its award, then that is something what the court can correct at the stage of section 34. The third is that where the award is patently contrary to any state or central legislation, that is something again what can be looked at the stage of section 34, and the court can set aside such awards. And number 4 is that any unreasoned award which does not give reasoning when it comes to a determination of fact or whether it comes to a determination in respect of any other subject matter of the dispute, that is something what again can be looked at by the court in section 34. By the 2019 amendment, one very important change has been brought about, and that is that in the previous amendment, the evidence to curtail that practice, now that part has also been done away with. The other issue which arises with section 34 is to be read in conjunction with section 36, which basically says that arbitral award, wherever it becomes enforceable, it can be enforced like a decree of a court, and the provisions of order 41 rule 5 are to be looked at. Judgment of IOCL versus Tokyo, the Delhi High Court has imposed a condition that the total awarded amount, so 100% of the awarded amount, was held to be deposited by the losing party in case they wanted a stay on execution of that particular award. However, let me also add that there is no hard and fast rule in respect of this, and it again depends upon the discretion of the court, but generally nowadays the courts are asking for deposit of certain part of the award depending upon the facts and circumstances of each case. Then comes section 37, which has very limited applicability because it is to a very large extent first or second appeal depending upon the second challenge, not appeal, second challenge depending upon which particular provision are you applying for. And in section 37, the following grounds additionally have been added, that refusing or referring the parties to arbitration under section 8 is an appealable order now, and you can straight away go to section 37, file an FAO, and you can agitate your rights under section 37. And similarly, granting or refusing to grant any measure under section 9 or setting aside or refusing to set aside an arbitral award under section 34 are also grounds under section 37. So I think with this we can conclude today's session. So if there are any specific issues or questions which anyone has on today's session, then I'll be happy to take those now.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, hi Sudhiti, how are you?
Hi, very well, sir. Thank you so much for beautifully explaining the law on arbitration to us. Now we move on to the next leg of the session, which is the question and answer round. Our viewers have few questions for you. The first question is, what are the kinds of arbitration agreements?
What are the kind of arbitration agreements? So
Yes.
what the question probably wants to say, what are the type of arbitrations in India? So there are ad hoc arbitrations and there are institutional arbitrations, if that is what the question pertains. Ad hoc arbitrations are something which are done without any institutions, and institutional arbitrations are something like which are conducted under the aegis of an institution, something like an International Chamber of Commerce or something like a Delhi International Arbitration Center. So these can be broadly this thing. The other way of probably interpreting the question can be that there are domestic arbitrations and there are international arbitration. International arbitrations are defined where at least one of the parties to the arbitration agreement is a foreign party.
So the next question is, what would constitute as a legal misconduct by an arbitrator?
What would constitute as a legal misconduct by an arbitrator would be I think probably what they want to ask is that on what grounds can you challenge an arbitrator? So those grounds have been now provided comprehensively under Schedule 5 and Schedule 7. So if there are any of those grounds which are available, then you can approach the court for basically removing or replacing the arbitral tribunal on the ground of misconduct. And that is something, I think those grounds are pretty elaborate, and there are a lot of judgments in respect of that. And again, it will depend upon the facts and circumstances of the specific case, whether it amounts to legal misconduct or not. But primarily, as a guiding principle, what you have to look at is Schedule 5 and Schedule 7.
So for a follow-up question to that would be, can an arbitral award be challenged on the ground that the arbitrator was biased or there was a legal misconduct by the arbitrator?
Absolutely. That is one of the primary grounds on which the arbitral awards can be challenged. And that is specifically been provided in a lot of judgments. All those, if anyone wants a specific citation of a judgments in respect of a fact, they can always ask me separately. So, but that is certainly a ground under Section 34 for challenging an award.
Thank you, sir. So shouldn't the arbitration tribunal function like other tribunals and have fixed timings like Monday to Friday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. and have a specified cause list? Will that work?
The only thing, the only purpose of providing an arbitration is that it provides the parties the flexibility, because all the parties are mature commercial parties, and it provides them the flexibility of choosing their own judge and getting the matter adjudged from that judge. Because given the pendency of cases in India, I'm not very sure that whether something like that can work or is even desirable in the first instance, that because most of the tribunals, to my mind, don't work as effectively as arbitrations work in India. So I think probably on a personal note, I would certainly not want to see that regime. And in fact, it is not followed anywhere throughout the world. So in most of the countries wherever arbitrations are held, they are held on in this manner only, and there's no specific arbitrator. Even though there are certain specific government entities like the CPWD or primarily, in fact, the CPWD, which has a whole-time person who's the arbitrator who's been appointed, who has a whole cause list, and all CPWD disputes are listed before him. So, but I think those instances are far and few in between. Most of the times it is something which is done in a flexible manner.
Okay, thank you, sir. So how can you be appointed as an arbitrator, and is there any specific qualification that you require to be an arbitrator?
Now, if you look at the 2019 amendment, there are specific qualifications which have been prescribed under Schedule 8 of the Arbitration Act for being appointed as an arbitrator. But again, those qualifications are very wide, and I think pretty much anyone and everyone can be appointed as an arbitrator, as far as one of the parties chooses them to be their nominee, or both the parties agree to that particular individual to be appointed as the chairman or to be appointed as the sole arbitrator.
Okay.
Or you're appointed to.
Okay. And if a person is a litigator, as as well as being appointed as an arbitrator, how does one manage being both and
So you again have to look at Schedule 5 and Sudhiti, am I audible now?
Yes, yes.
So under Schedule 5, any person who has normally been giving advice to any particular party, then obviously there is justifiable grounds of bias, and that person will be ineligible to be appointed as an arbitrator. If, let us say, for example, if I normally and regularly work with you as a litigator and both of us work in close association, then in that eventuality, you cannot appoint me to be an arbitrator in any of the disputes because of the close business relation that we have. And of course, there are threshold limits which have been prescribed under Section 5 and 7, under Schedule 5 and 7, in respect of what would be the specific bar in respect of where two parties have business relations and when can they be appointed and when they cannot be appointed. All of these answers are given in a comprehensive manner in Schedule 5 and 7.
Okay. Thank you, sir. And how does one determine the jurisdiction in filing a Section 34 petition?
I'm sorry, your voice was...
Hello?
Repeat the
So,
sir,
Didi,
am
can
I
you please
audible
repeat
now?
the question again? You were not audible. You're audible now, please.
Yeah. So how do one determine the jurisdiction when one has to file a petition under Section 34?
So you will basically decide the jurisdiction on the basis of what will be the sum in dispute. So the sum in dispute has now been held to be a combination of the claim and the counterclaim. So if let us say your sum in dispute is 1.5 crore, and if your claim is 1.5 crore and your counterclaim was 75 lakhs, there was earlier an issue that whether both of them can be added together. To now, my mind, I think that issue has been put to rest, and the Delhi High Court, Justice Naveen Chawla, has held that both of them can be added up, and therefore, I think then the jurisdiction would be Delhi High Court if it becomes over 2 crores. So anything over 2 crores will be Delhi High Court. Anywhere where the claim and the counterclaim is less than 2 crores will be District Court. To my mind, there are a lot of conflicting judgments whether the claim and counterclaims can be added. But I think the best course forward, because if you read the provisions of Commercial Courts Act and also the latest judgment of Justice Naveen Chawla, both of them should be added, even though there are a lot of contrary judgments to that effect.
Okay, thank you. So the last question for you is that Ms. Kajal has asked that what is the difference between seat and venue, which I think you had covered during one of the topics in the session. If
Yes.
you can explain it again.
So seat is something which brings along with it the jurisdiction. Venue is something which is as per the convenience of the parties. So if there is a seat which has been selected specifically by the parties, the jurisdiction of that specific court within whose territorial jurisdiction the seat is located would also follow. So I had already said during my discussion that if the seat is Delhi, the venue can keep on changing from one place to the other. And the basic difference between seat and jurisdiction, if one wants to find out, I think the best read would be the judgment of Supreme Court in Kaiser International.
With that, sir, we come to an end with our question and answer round as well. I'd like to thank you once again for your valuable time and being with us this evening. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful session.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to you, Sudhiti, and thank you to Janvi as well for organizing this. I think it's a very both all of you and your team are doing.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.